right, let's bring in Arthur Milnes, political historian and personal friend of Jimmy Carter. Arthur, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Renee.
How do you expect Jimmy Carter to be remembered in Georgia today?
Oh, just as if we're talking political, he was the first president from the Deep South in 130 years. Think of that. And again, sticking with politics, remarkably skilled politician. It's one of the parts of his legacy that's not getting a lot of attention right now. Is he ran for governor once and was defeated by that arch segregationist Lester Maddox, and he went off, licked his wounds, and then came back a few years later and was sworn in as governor in 1971. Never gave up. A great lesson there for if you get defeated one time, you just pick yourself up and keep going. And same thing you could argue after he became president. He was defeated after one term, and I would argue a very accomplished term, contrary to what, if there's one thing from talking to Jimmy Carter over the years, he didn't like to be called a great ex-president. He felt, and I would agree with him, he felt that diminished his presidency. And I would agree with him in the sense that the projects he worked on as a former president that he's most known for these days were actually in areas that he had started to work on when he was president. So in many ways, he felt his presidency was, or his post-presidency was a continuation of his presidency, but with a much smaller bully pulpit. And boy, did he make that smaller bully pulpit matter as well, as you know.
Mm-hmm. Now, you will be attending the funeral service in Washington. What are you expecting?
Oh, just, you know with what the Americans are going through, right, with how divided they've been and that ugly, awful, terrible election campaign of not of ideas, but of personal attacks and everything. I think this, in many ways, would be Jimmy Carter's final public service. Will only be a week before, roughly, Donald Trump is inaugurated again. And there's going to be a pause in the open warfare in politics down there. And that's what I'm looking forward to see these American politics, like I said, calm down for a couple of days. I think that's needed. And for us, for my wife and I, it's just a great, great personal honor. And had you told me when I was growing up in Scarborough, when he was president, and my mom first got me interested in President Carter, had you ever told me I'd be going to his state funeral as a guest of his, I would have told you you're crazy. So it's quite an honor.
Mm-hmm. You were a friend of Jimmy Carter's. There's been a lot of emotion following his death. What have you been reflecting on when it comes to his legacy?
Just for me personally, the times that he was in my corner and joined by Mrs. Carter when he didn't have to. I've faced some mental health challenges, depression and things. And President Carter was right there for me when I needed it most. But on the, more importantly, on the larger scale, the millions and millions of lives that he touched. And if we look at just one example from his presidency, right now there's the awful situation in Gaza and Israel that's been going on for a year and more. Well, Jimmy Carter, let's remember, Jimmy Carter brought the president of Egypt and the prime minister of Israel together. He risked his very presidency to fight for peace between Israel and Egypt. And they had fought something like 4 wars against each other. And that Camp David peace treaty that Carter forged still stands today, 45 years later. And one can only imagine how many lives have been saved, or all the lives that folks who have never heard of Jimmy Carter in the future, young people growing up in the developing world who no longer will suffer the horrors of guinea worm disease or river blindness.
Right.
Because of the efforts that he fought. And as Canadians, He loved our country, and he never forgot what Canada did in 1979 and 80 when the American embassy was overrun in Tehran and the American hostages were taken, and six of those diplomats were turned away from other countries, but not Canada. Canada's ambassador took those six in, kept them in safety, putting Ambassador Ken Taylor's life and his staff and his wife at risk. But we did it. We were there for America when it mattered, and Jimmy Carter never forgot. And once he gave a speech I was at in Plains, Georgia, for a group of Canadians, and he discussed what he called the Canadian caper when Canada had saved his six diplomats. And I tell you, Rene, he started crying. He started crying with emotion. He called it the greatest moment of his presidency. And as a Canadian, a lot of us teared up to hear a man who'd been the most powerful man in the world, a political leader in the world. And here he was in tears, thanking our country. It was a very moving moment as a Canadian.
That is a very, very nice moment that you described there. Arthur, we'll have to leave it there. That's our time. Thank you very much for your insights once again today, Arthur, and our condolences to you and all the best to you, Arthur.
Thanks, Renee.
That is Arthur Milnes, political historian and friend of Jimmy Carter.